this is about essentially how to propose a library for standardization. Obviously, for this audience, it's mostly what we're talking about at Boost libraries. However, the general principles of what we're talking about here apply to anything, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if particularly small proposals that people in the Boost community may well have some libraries that they might want to propose that are not part of Boost at the moment. Interrupt with questions. That's probably obvious with a small number of people here, but whatever. So we'll look at how to successfully propose a library for standardization. But I sort of got a sub-agenda, and we need volunteers to write proposals and help in other ways. But Boost has a lot of libraries that the maintainers are either very busy or aren't even active anymore, that are interesting libraries. And I want to be able to, I don't want Boost to fail to propose libraries simply because no one's, the maintainer can't do the work. Anyone can propose a library. You do not have to be the author of the library. You do not have to hold a copyright on it, or you don't, assuming it's got a license that allows you to.
Specifically, when I put a array up for TR1, I wasn't the array library author.
I'm gonna show one here as an example that I'm not the author of the library. I just wrote the thing. Let me give you some background on the C++ Standards Committee. These help you a lot, I think, in understanding why things happen, is one sort of what seems to be a digression. First, understand the C++ Standards Committee is all volunteer. It is just like Boost. It has no employees. You can't tell people to do something because they won't, or they'll quit or something. They're volunteers. Another thing is that nothing happens without a written proposal. There are mailing lists, there are this, and there are that. There where a lot of argument and discussion happens, and people can wave their arms and say things, but nothing really happens unless something is written. I started to say on paper, we're not that old-fashioned. but there are two ways you might write something. If it's like a little fix to an existing component, the library's issues list is the paper, as it were. But even that, if somebody comes in and says something's a defect, blah, 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 the library working group will say, geez, that's too big a problem to tackle through an issue. Write a paper. Now, so the committee needs, and the committee is, and I should interject this right here. We're at the point in the cycle that standards go through, where we just shipped a major update. Now is the time where we look at the future, where are we going, and so it's a good time to make proposals for new components. That's always true. This time in particular, they've decided that they really want a lot of new libraries. They want a big expansion in the standard library. And it seemed to me, and Alistair's the chairman of the library working group, so he can comment on this, but it seemed to me that there was a tendency to be interested in things that were a little bit of a narrower problem domain that maybe they wouldn't have been so interested in 5 years ago, 8 years ago. What do you think? You're not so sure of that?
I'm not so sure about that. there seems to be interest in getting larger libraries, so they bring more of a facility with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's clearly true. It may be, part of the push may be coming, you know, it's a group of people. They act as individuals, not as some monolithic organization. And that the library working group people are the ones that do the work. So they, and they care about libraries deeply, so they tend to be a little pickier. Her, Bjarne, some other people may want to see a lot of libraries, but they're not doing the work, and so,
And I'm very happy to see what's happened with the file system proposal. I don't know if that's being mentioned later on in this
Yeah,
slide.
yeah.
Okay, I'll not jump ahead then.
okay, anyway. Something that's very, very new is we're trying to reach out to library authors, and we're gonna try to provide some active help for people putting proposals together. Just another comment is, if you enjoy and learn from Boost and BoostCon C++ now, then you'll probably also enjoy and learn from the standardization process. Okay, my sort of teaser to put up on the screen, let's correct it. The C++ Standards Committee doesn't just want Boost authors and Boost proposals and proposals in general, it needs us. They're not gonna meet their goals if we don't generate some resources. Of course, the slides will go up whenever I finish them. But here's some key things, here's some resources if you're not familiar with the standard, how the standard committee works. Some of these resources are important. Some of this may change too, because there's a move going on to centralize stuff under a central website. But as of the moment, the C++ Standards Committee website it's not particularly informative. It's mostly a storage place where people store things, where stuff. But that's where you go for. I mean, one of the big things you want handy if you're working on proposals is the C++ 11 standard itself. What I find, and most people find, is they don't actually use the original 11 standard. They don't pay ANSI $30 for a copy. They use the latest working draft because that has corrections, and that's what the compiler is working on. It's a little hard to find the latest working draft. As far as I know, you still go to that URL up there, and we've got fast connections, so I'm not gonna take the time to try that right now, but, and you look, it lists a bunch of document numbers, and you look for one that's title is Working Draft Standard for Programming Language C++, and you look for the one that has the highest number, that's the latest draft downloaded.
The technique I use to help me find it most quickly, if I don't just use the search on the web pages, I just go down the author's Stéphanos du Toit, because I find the author names are much easier thing to pick up, and that's usually the right document.
Yeah, sometimes I've caught myself going down looking for the largest document, you know, all these other things are papers and stuff, even the issues lists aren't that huge compared to the standard, so anyway. Well, I mean, that's the kind of thing that drives some of us ballistic on the committee, to put it bluntly, because some people on the committee look inward, others look outward. I believe the committee needs to look outward a great deal more. Herb seems to be on that kick too at the moment. I keep forgetting this is being recorded. Okay, now, we've got, for library working group, we're starting to do some work on GitHub. The actual source file for the standard is up there. And so there's a GitHub URL, and if you go to that, you'll get an index page, and one of the things there is a call for library proposals. Should I click on it? Man, we have got fast connectivity here. the call for library proposals, and we can actually, it's too small, but we can actually, I'm actually not chopping any of them. This is, this is where, this is the stuff for library authors. This tells you a lot of stuff that you need to know, and we can go through it at some point. I think maybe we should take a minute to go through it, but among other things, here's a sort of a template that you can actually use for writing a proposal. But I think, let me just maybe go through the other resources, and then we'll come back to that. There's also, one of the questions comes up that's of interest is, if you're thinking of proposing a library from scratch, you know, you're not a Boost library particularly, but has somebody else already proposed the same thing? Or maybe you have proposed a library. What's the progress? Where's it going? Okay, Alastair is putting this together, and at least at the moment. This is and this will get updated periodically. I must be looking at a draft because it doesn't have a permanent number there. It's basically, here's a table of every proposal that's active. And where there's several document numbers, and they're categorized by where they are in the process right now. If there are several numbers, it's because there have been a number of papers. The one with the highest number is because the numbers are assigned sequentially, is by definition the most recent one.
And again, we're using, you can spot the colour coding to go between similar themes. So if there's papers on a related area, they're banded by colour, and others alternate between the colours so that you've got that theme.
If you get interested in standards work, and, well, just there's a lot of administrative stuff that goes in, and if you sort of want to get on the committee and do stuff so you feel useful the first meeting or two, while you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on, volunteering to help with something is always, boy, it makes you real popular real fast. Okay, let's, yeah, this is, I can't figure out how to shrink this. I'm using Open Office. I've just started to use it for presentations, and mostly it's okay, but there are a few things I haven't figured out. There is a, Stepanis, the project editor, has started, I'll see if I can get it, it's gonna connect me. He started a thing, a little write-up of some areas where people have trouble learning how to write standardese. When do you use shall? When do you use should? You know, and stuff like that. And he's just got it started, but so I'm starting to pass, which it's wonderful. It's been needed a long time, and I'm kind of hoping he will continue that effort. I've been pestering him. So there's some resources. We're going to look at some other resources later. Okay, now this is supposed to be trumpets blaring, except I don't have any sound file to go with it. This is an announcement. This is Herb started to talk about this morning. Okay. Herb's put up there is a Google Groups discussion group. There's nothing on it at the moment, but he's just this weekend getting it going, and it's crashing and things like that because Herb has not ever set up things like this in Google Groups, and he's actually setting up several things, but it's a ISO C++ Standard Library Proposals discussion list. This is a public list. You can join it. You just do whatever you do to join a public Google list, Google Docs list, Google Groups. It's called Google Groups, that's the right name. And it's going to be read and hopefully responded to, if Alistair can talk them into it, enough of library working group members and other committee members. So if you have questions, that there's a place that it's there for questions and proposals, about proposals. It's separated from other mailing lists, so that, it's a place for people that have questions about proposals, and there's no such thing as being too newbie or a question too naive on this. We might just turn you around and point you to the call for proposals, as opposed if there's a question that's already been answered, but.
So is this about proposals in general or specific proposals that have been offered?
Yes.
This is,
Okay.
yes,
Just trying to clarify.
it's people getting ready, and then as they get farther into the process, at some point, if a proposal starts to go, there's some point where it transfers off of this list or does it stay, I don't, we don't even.
Ultimately, we need a document with an N number supplied by Clark, who's
Yeah.
what's Clark's title? On the
Secretary,
Secretary.
yeah. But this is, it's the place to get going and deal with this. Because we're getting very inconsistent results on it at the moment as he figures out all the, this is a Google Groups business group or something that he got going, and because it gives him as the one who's setting these lists up, and he's set several of them up, public lists. I think he's got 4 public lists available now. 2 for library and 2 for core language, I believe. I think he's got another one that's the same thing, except it's not standard library proposals, it's for language proposals. And try to solicit language proposals.
I know the language side tends to split between core and evolution, which are 2 different subgroups within the C++ community. We've got core, evolution, and library. And evolution seems to design the language features, and then when they're ready, core deal with all of the wordsmithing.
Core, folks in core are the compiler writers primarily. They're folks from EDG, from Microsoft, from Intel. They're compiler writers. There's only 1 or 2, like Jens Maurer is the only one I know that sort of can think of offhand that's not employed by him.
James Whitman, there's the
Well,
static
but
analysis tools
James
people.
Whitman's a static analysis
Yeah.
tools guy, so
He's
that's
still
really a
looking at it.
compiler that it just, yeah, so. But anyway, Herb asked me to put that Google Groups full thing up there, because sometimes if you try to find it, or the nice easy URL hasn't been working. I'm gonna try to click on this and see what it comes up with at the moment. See, this is, no, that's, we're sort of close. No, that's not.
Recently viewed on the side.
You've got you can hit the browse all on the far right, in the middle of the screen. You can browse all the CPP groups.
Oh, my, okay,
This is Google.
But you've got it under your recently viewed.
So my group shows you all your groups, but you came to the Google Groups for ISO CPP. So if you hit browse all groups, you'll see all the groups under the CPP, ISO CPP, sorry, that Herb set up.
look, I found it,
Yeah.
there it is. Yeah, the first one, that's the that's the list for stuff in the current standard, or, it's, the second one's the one we're interested in, the proposals list. And there's only like 3 messages, it's me saying test message, and so, because this, I can't say. I was gonna say what's going on, but this is very new, let's put it this way. It's evolving as we talk. But it's intended to be the place you can go and get authoritative authoritative answers to those questions that are bound to come up. Okay, let's move on from that. I get to talk a little bit about, I'm gonna just quickly go over some of the terminology, ISO, alphabet soup, essentially. And this hit me because you'll notice that it changed. This is a change. So we're not proposing libraries for TR2. Forget it, there is no TR2. Here's the deal. We're dealing with international standards. These, IS is the abbreviation. These are the fully baked standards, like the C++ standard itself. TS, technical specifications. These are formerly the type 2 technical reports like TR1. This is best for things that are not quite ready for full standardization. They're not as, I mean, even a Boost library that's been out there for a long time, Boost, that's great. It gets a lot of existing use, but there's still some communities that Boost isn't that well known.
What?
Or disallowed.
Or disallowed, yeah.
Okay, we're not allowed to use Boost.
Anyway,
So,
a lot of the library people feel much more comfortable moving a new library, no matter how good a library it is, into coming out as a TS, formerly TR, because we think of it as beta. You're putting people on notice that this could change. Don't, if we find, if somebody reports a big problem, we're gonna fix it. Don't be upset about it. Some people in the rest of the language committee, the rest of the C++ committee may feel that we're a bit conservative and perfectionist, and there are other, and so, and there's a little change in procedure to deal with that. I won't get into that now. There is such a thing as a technical report. These are informative papers. They're not technical specifications. There was a type 3 technical report on performance. It's just how to get the best out of C++. It's not a hard spec the way the others are. The other new alphabet soup are these study groups to speed things up. And I've set up 4, 2 of which I can't remember what they are, but
Concurrency, file system.
concurrency, file system, networking, and modules, yeah. And concurrency and modules are, I'm interested in them, but they're not areas I'm expert in, so. These working groups, or study groups, work independently, although they report back to the committee. They have their own chairs, and the thing that's particularly different about them is that they, in their own mailing list, they have a lot of, I think ISO calls them domain experts. That's people like you guys, people that are familiar, that are interested in some area and have enough expertise that they want you. And they held some of them will just work by mailing lists, some will hold meetings. 2 of them, networking and concurrency, held a meeting in Seattle, I think, somewhere.
I think so.
Yeah, last week. And they have 40 people show up. And at least 10 of them were people who had never had anything to do with the standards committee, although Herb said he recognized the names of about half of them as being notable experts in the other, and he could tell just from the conversation that the other people were experts too, he just didn't have to know. Or, experts in the sense, quite familiar with the subject matter. And so it looks successful to go out. So that's some terminology. Revised procedures, this is critically important for library. Instead of having TR2, which is open, which takes us, say, 5 to 7 years to get out, with 12 libraries in it, was that how many were in TR1? Something
you
around
wouldn't
there.
try it.
What we're gonna do is run stuff in parallel. So there's already two of these things running in parallel, networking and file system. And, they, when they're ready, they ship essentially. So particularly file system, because it doesn't look like there's gonna be, at least as of the moment, nobody's proposed anything else to go with that other than Boost file system. Why not just ship it when it's ready? Don't hold it for years. There's a few limitations on that, but networking, that they're kind of thinking that one is bigger, will probably take longer, but again, why not ship from ready? However, here's another difference. The target decision. We're working on C++ 1Y, tentatively scheduled for around 2017. We're not gonna say, and you don't have to say in your proposal, what your real target for this is. So they could take, say, file system is ready, and what the instructions are, when the working group and then the library working group itself is satisfied with our working paper for the file system, that then we look at three possibilities, well, one fourth possibility is say it's not good enough, toss it. But hopefully you've done that. Herb put that in his list, I didn't put it in. Hopefully, if it's not good enough, you tossed it long before this, but they could say for whatever reason, no, they want to hold that for the next standard. They could say, I mean, it is a mature library, Microsoft is with 2011, when that ships, are shipping a version of it. It's an older version, it's version 2, but for a lot of the standards people, that's, the fact that it's version 2 versus version 3 doesn't matter. It's a library that's already had a great deal of exposure, and now that's gonna increase that exposure. They might conceivably say, geez, it's fine, we don't need to go to NETS, which is a staging area essentially. We'll hold directly for the standard. But the other thing, and this is new, pretty new, is to say no, geez, it could be its own international standard. And yeah, we ship. I mean, the last two means you ship right away, but it's what status that you ship. If you ship, the advantage of, if you thought it was good enough people think it's good enough, strong consensus will be required, then your work's over more quickly.
Can I add a couple of points there?
Yeah.
It's, if something like file system comes out today, I think the idea is shipping quickly is a good thing because the next standards seem to be a while away. If we're getting closer to the next standard shipping, it might be better to, if we're confident it's good enough, rather than ship it out as a parallel TS and miss the boat of that standard coming out. If we're really keen on it, it's got the chance to fold in. The other kind of work I think we'd want to fold into C++ 1Y rather than go out as a separate TS is if you're interacting with a lot of the existing standard headers. It's lots of enhancements, lots of things that belong in those kind of parts. But it's much more standalone, it's much easier to...
Yeah, I'm gonna hit that later, because that's critical enough, I have a slide. So.
The idea of something as a separate IS is, again, my mind, not necessarily my mind as library share, but just my own personal thinking is something like networking might serve better as a separate standard as opposed to folded into the standard that everyone has to ship. Because then it can be much nimbler and able to better react to the standard it's binding to if they change. Because you're talking internet or networking protocols. We don't control the networking protocols, and you might need to be more responsive there. And not all hardware that you ship supports necessarily.
It's big. I mean, SEO, the proposal would have 150, I think it was 140 or 150 pages of standardese. That's almost twice the size of I/O streams. There might be some discomfort with simply its size that could be resolved by shipping as a separate standard. Anyway, there's a little more flexibility than there has been in the past. Rob?
One of the problems I have writing portable code Linux and Windows with TR1
is Microsoft has chosen to put their stuff into what would become the standard headers, whereas GCC chose to put it into a TR1, so you had to include TR1 slash something. Can that be normalized? Because otherwise I end up having it conditionally compiled.
Well, I forget when. Let me see.
I mean, I realize they're not normative,
Let me,
you know, but-
here's, it was widely agreed upon by people who often don't agree on anything, that TR1 caused vendors much greater headache than expected, simply because it modified existing standard library headers. And the problem being that you don't have people often don't have as much control over headers. Headers are shared between a C group, a C++, and apparently you get into internal politics of the big vendors. And so here's the deal. I mean, and of course, this can change in a moment's notice if somebody comes up with each proposal is voted on its own merits, not on any set of fixed rules. But right now, what people are saying is no changes to existing standard library headers until C++1Y. So if you've got change that the only way it can work is by adding a new member to standard string, for just as an example, or any, or you gotta say some enum somewhere, you need to add it's gotta be held till C++1Y. So what I would just suggest is warn you off changes to standard headers. Is there another way to do it? And I would have said that's not something to worry about, and well, none of us thought it was that big of a deal, but it turned out to be, it really was. It bothered these guys. It slowed the process of getting TR1 implementations out to people. So think if there's a way, if it's, I mean, there was one thing I was doing that I figured out a trivial way to do it as its own separate header without.
One of the things that's particularly difficult is if you're not that standard library vendor, it was very hard for a third-party supplier of TR1 to amend your headers. John Maddock did immense wonders to make that work for Boost. But he asked never to do it again.
Well, right, yes, and he also, and he had people willing to change, do stuff to help him, and he asked that. John, it's like John Maddock and Peter Dimmow essentially created these unique positions for themselves by never showing up at committee meetings in person. They become legends, and when they say something, you say, "Oh yes," you stand up and salute. And if it was causing John trouble, we don't want to do it, much less anybody else. The other thing that's very, very important is they're willing to accept proposals into now they're not accepting them into the standard, but they're willing to accept proposals to work on that do not have standardese. They do not have to have formal proposed wording in the initial proposal document. And that's critical because we time and time have heard from people that sheared off. They failed to put in a proposal of what they thought should go in the standard because they felt so uncomfortable with standardese. There's gonna be lots of stuff come in where initially there will be no standardese. I'm gonna talk about cases where I feel as a practical matter, you should include standardese, but those are some, okay. Here's the steps you're gonna go through. You're gonna do some preparation and planning so that you're gonna write and submit an initial proposal or whoever. You'll get feedback from the committee in various ways. We're gonna sort of increase the steps now where you can just post something that goes through this mailing list that I gave you the URL. told you where we're gonna get a better URL, or where you can get some help with drafts and things like that. And, but anyway, there's certainly a feedback loop, probably multi-stage feedback loop. It would, oh, maybe a few, there may have been a few tiny proposals written by somebody who had vast experience that went through unchanged. But that's not gonna, it's gonna be pretty uncommon. There's usually at least typo fixes, if not.
That's what we're trying to think of an example.
Yeah, I can't. I think Matt, enable if went through all through, no, I'm sure the revision. Anyway, this is a feedback cycle. Then the library working group gets comfortable with it, votes it out of the library working group, and assuming, and it gets presented to the committee and by the library working group chair, says a few words about it. And there's a committee straw vote, and then there's a formal vote, and it gets added to whatever working paper it's destined for. Then at that point, in theory, you're done. In practice, what happens is people start to, there are some people in this world who save themselves trouble by not reading anything until it goes into the working paper. And then they start, that last group starts shooting at it. And so you tend to like to monitor the issues list at least. And if there are issues, open up. And then you, the only way to change, once it's in the working paper, the only way to change it, and this includes library author can't change it either. The only way to change it is to submit an issue, go on the issues list that says, I think there's this problem, here's the proposed fix to it. So you tend to monitor that, and you like to see it go through the publication process and whatnot. But
By the time you go this far in, you're not really seeing changes to the design, it's just
yeah,
where's
you're
that
not,
how you wrote the
and a lot of,
specification rather
and
than.
minor changes often, people, you don't have to even be involved in that if it's inconvenient. I mean, a lot of the changes are, they're near typo level, and they just,
Maybe a recognition, we said this, we've got this requirement table over here that says what you're trying to say more clearly. Let's just,
yeah, and so they say, gee, yeah, that's the kind of issue that arises, which is say, you wrote out some specification, but somebody points out, well, that's exactly the same specification as already given in such and such a requirement. One of the key things in writing standards is you try to avoid saying the same thing twice in two different places. So, anyway. Now, I want to look at a proposal here. I've got it on my browser. Oh, geez, man, the internet connection here, when it works, is wonderful.
Maybe that's just the browser cache.
No, it's not. Well, it could be, I suppose.
well, this is coming from your C drive, so.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Oh, no wonder it's fast. This machine's older, but it's got a solid state disk in it.
And that might be a problem when you post the slides. The rest of us wouldn't be able to access your C drive.
I'll I gotta, yeah, no. No, I shouldn't have. I could have, no. Anyway, this is, we're gonna look at it, this isn't just any library proposal, it's the proposal for Boost Any. And this is a real proposal. It's actually comes from, this is my working, what we're looking at, what that repo thing is it's a GitHub repo, excuse me, not GitHub, it's a Git repo. The actual cloud version of it is on in a Dropbox folder, and so it's up on Dropbox, and I have access to it through my notebook machine. I mean, my desktop machine, I mean notebook machine. And one of the things I do when I'm working on a proposal and I'm about done with it, or I highlight in yellow things that I'm going to have to go back to and change before I ship it. one of the rules you'll, earlier in the, when you know that you're gonna wanna, the way you ship a document is you email it to Clark Nelson, and by the time you're that far into the process, you'll know his email address, or maybe Alistair or something, but you never, and you get Clark very mad at you because ISO gets mad at him, if you never show a document in any form of public website or whatever with an N number and then change it. I got the number, he's told me what the N number is going to be. D stands for draft. The moment before I email it to him, I change that to an N and tag it in and so forth and so on. That's why that's in. And I didn't write I don't even know very much about the Annie library, to tell you the truth. I couldn't even remember how it worked internally. I had to step through because this dates from the original proposal was in 2006. So what I've done is I've taken that original proposal and I can't even remember what the reaction was.
There were some concerns about making sure we could apply the small object optimization, but generally favourable. Some concern about
Alistair's younger than him, he's got a better memory. There is a committee wiki, in fact, you could go to and probably find the reaction, but I said, I don't care, I'm proposing this again, no matter what, because it's such a different group now. Even if they didn't like it, then they might like it, and then vice versa for that matter, for some reason.
it was on track for TR2, I can't remember what further
It may have just gotten set aside because we set all of TR2 aside because we needed to throw all manpower on shipping. So anyway, the way and this is also the way Beaman does proposals. It's a real one. And I also, I emailed it a draft to Kevlin before I shipped it to make sure he was on board with it. Because I try to get co-authors because I believe it makes proposals look more important. I mean, Kevlin's widely respected. To say that he designed this, he picked up, I don't know, a couple minor little things, or at least he had comments. The way you usually do this stuff is when a proposal that you're submitting, a paper is a revision, you identify it as a revision. It's okay to change the name, but Clark likes to know you've changed the name because he tracks, like Alistair was tracking, what all the papers were for.
Well, that's what made it easy when I started doing that, to build the tracking list as well.
Particularly, I use HTML. Formats can be submitted in plain text, as plain text files, not recommended. Just because, that's not. Bill Plogger, he sends them in plain text.
I've submitted TXT before as well.
Yeah,
I think I submitted all the formats at various times.
Bill Plogger, so they just live with it. Bill's so respected that he doesn't have to worry about prettying up his proposals. I like HTML because I'm just comfortable with it. A lot of proposals, the other probably neck and neck or very close to the same number of proposals come in as PDF files. Those are the acceptable formats. I prefer on the HTML files to put a little table of contents up there. First thing is an introduction. Just says what it is, and I've got a marked up version too, but introduction, motivation. There's a bunch of stuff. This was I've actually I probably never pulled the latest version. I've sort of improved this a little bit. I have a little revision history, some examples. But I think one of the points I want to make here is that this is not, any consists of a class and 3 free functions. And the class is not all that big. So no matter how complex under the covers the implementation is concerned, the spec is pretty small when you get down to the spec. The weight of your proposal sort of should match the weight of the component, just in a sense that you're gonna bore people, even irritate them if you write 50 pages of whatever for any. I do, and particularly any is an existing library. There was a paper about it, I've referenced that paper up there in it. It's a Boost library, and these are, now, and I think, looking at the clock, I'm gonna do this now. I wanna call out a few things that I'm saying up here right in the introduction. The sort of magic words. Somebody left a laser pointer.
Yeah, it's a working laser pointer.
Should I make this bigger? Is that readable?
Bigger would be
No,
handy.
not on
Bigger's probably, yeah, just do one.
bigger for camera.
You know, I've said what it does, just the sort of the, it's a type safety container for single values of value types. Just some kind of a bite, a sound bite description of what it does. But then the next paragraph is absolutely and utterly critical, even in a tiny proposal, where I say, the proposal is based on the Boost Mini library. I have established that this library is existing practice when I say that. You want to say that. Boost is widely respected in the standard in the library working group. Most of the library working group at one time or another contributes or supports in some way. Many of them know the contents of Boost. So you want existing, the purpose from ISO standpoint of a lot of this stuff is to standardize existing practice. So even for this tiny proposal, you can say that. The Boost version of the library is widely used. I don't have numbers to say that, but it is my belief that is correct. It has been in Boost library for, I forget, since around 2000 or 2001 or something like that. I believe.
It was one of the very early ones.
Very early ones. You know, it's not as much as a corner library as some things in Boost. Now, watch this. The proposal is a pure addition to the standard library, requires no modifications to existing headers. Furthermore, it would have no effect on existing code. Probably should have said user code. Or I should have said library or user code. Make it damn clear. Okay. Those are magic words. They lower the barrier, they lower serious barriers to entry. On the other hand, if this in some way breaks existing code, you need to call that out, because that's an important consideration, and you need to provide in your proposal rationale, particularly if it's a serious break, or worse yet, a silent break. You need to call that, I mean, that's a problem, and you need to call it out and address it. So even though it's a little, the point being, you don't have to write a lot of words. Simple proposal, some pretty simple words, but that, you're just gonna get asked those questions. You might as well put them in the proposal. Now, another thing I want to mention is, let's get down, now we eventually get down to proposed wording. So, should you include proposed wording in your proposal. Well, here's my thinking on this. This is this has already been through one, we've seen it once, so why not? But this is a small proposal. The whole synopsis of the library is it's not a huge library. That's the whole synopsis of the thing. Why wouldn't you, and then, certainly there's more wording, but if you don't include proposed wording, people can give reactions to general descriptions and whatnot, but these, in the library working group, these are people who write code. They read code. They understand, no matter how good they are at some other things, they're programmers. Or a lot of them are. Some of them are academics. But they read specifications very, very well. They love to see. Standardese may be hard for some people to read, but not people in the library working group. It's something they understand. So if you can come up with half-decent standardese, I would say go ahead and do it. I want to make it, if it's an existing Boost library, you've got near standardese, okay? You think, oh, what do I do? Well, a lot of your stuff isn't, you probably have to make a few changes, and the kind of changes up at the beginning there, I added that, it had this clause described, it didn't have this clause described, but the rest of it, and that's just sort of standard for anything, may perform operations of objects of a discriminated type. That's just what's in the current Boost documentation. The rest of this is pretty much what's in the Boost documentation, or at least was at that time. But the only thing I did that turned it something that was very non-standardese into legit standardese was I put it in a note. The standard distinguishes between normative and non-normative text. Anything in a note, a footnote, or an example is non-normative text. So you can't, there are a few violations of ISO rules. You can't name a copyright a trademark, and a few rules like that. The project editor will take care of those. But it's often pretty easy to actually take the other things as standardese, is writing the details of the class, the actual explanations of this for the members of a class or the free functions or whatever. And your Boost documentation, your documentation from your library is probably already, we've tried to encourage people to use that same form of specification. The formatting might be a little different in this and that. Don't worry about formatting. That's not your concern. The project editor, that's so, why not? And even if your standardese is pretty imperfect, that's not going to bother people. That's not why they're going to reject this proposal or accept it. They're going to feel they understand it better if they see you. So for small proposals where you've already got something, I'd say include it. Let's get Alice beyond that.
In fact, I'd say for a small proposal on the scale of any, wording is vital because it lets the committee know that you understand what you're trying to say. On the other hand, the quality of the wording is almost secondary because no wording is going to enter the committee and survive unscathed. But having wording says we know roughly what impact it's going to have on the standard document. We know the shape of the proposal, we know the size of the proposal, and even if you drop out at this point, the committee's got something you can start with, and we're very good at tweaking and tweezing and moving things forward till we're happy with them. If we have wording, proposals are a very real thing. On the other hand, if we go to a large-scale proposal like the networking proposals, I wouldn't say it's counterproductive to have wording there, but you're dealing with something where there's going to be fundamental design questions. And if you have a large proposal and then a large amount of wording, it almost inhibits people to think they've got a big sea of something to read through.
Yeah, and if it's a big library, relatively big library, and your documentation, and maybe it's very well documented, but in a form that's quite a bit different from this, it would be days and days and days of work to turn it into standardese. I would really suggest that you don't include standardese, because you want some, maybe they don't like the general premises of your library. If you're doing traversals, they're gonna want iterator-based traversals. They're not gonna want some cursor thing that and some stuff like that. They may just, they're gonna have some questions, and if they don't like the answers, they're not gonna be happy with the library. And just because it's a boost doesn't automatically make everybody happy with it. So this is a bigger, I think it's a big plus that we're willing to really seriously look at proposals without wording. The rest of the wording is just, it's the same stuff you already put in. So let's go back to it. Okay, we've looked at Boost Any. Why bother? You can start to see this quite a bit of work, particularly if it's maybe not your library. I should leave this. Wider library scrutiny and acceptance. While Boost is well accepted for a lot of places, there are projects that you gotta go to. There are some projects that say must be standard library. No, third-party libraries are accepted. Some of the real high security ones, for example, there's stuff where people's lives are writing on each thing, and it reduces your long-term maintenance, because eventually, if the library stabilizes and you're no longer, and it's shipping in the standard, everybody's got an implementation, we just, we'll pull it. Why should we? Eventually, we'll pull libraries from Boost just because they have become so ingrained, and there's no new, they're not being used as experimentals, so it's a good way to get involved in the C++ committee. And that is a pleasurable experience. It's a learning experience, it's professional development experience. I notice that C++ committee members, when they're looking for a job, I've noticed how often they are hired.
Reappear in the committee.
They reappear in the committees, and that's natural, is that a lot of the committee members work for companies that are searching for quality C++ people, and they sure prefer to hire somebody they have seen at work and know, not only do they know about C++, but how did they get on with people and others. So it's a great, you call that professional development, is sort of the code word for that. It's not, but it's, we get 2 committee members here that are working for companies that was, in both cases, how you made the, contact with.
That's it, and on the learning experience, writing my very first proposal and trying to figure out how to specify rather than write a library and turn this into standardese, it's a skill I simply didn't have, and it's been invaluable to me professionally ever since. I think there's far too many software developers, they learn how to write code, but they don't learn how to write a specification. And you understand the value of these things much more once you've just gone through the exercise.
So an awful lot of the committee, I'll take credit for this. There are a lot of committee members that I essentially, when I started Boost, one of the objectives was to recruit new, younger people. And that's true, and it was effective, and you go through the committee, and there are loads of people on the committee. There are critical people on the committee who came through Boost, got attracted, and that's what attracted them to. And the ones I call them rats, the ones that got on the committee and they got so interested, they moved to some other work, they moved to core.
There's some core people that.
Jens, I mean, Jens is was the original designer and author of the Boost Random Library. Jens is a superb library designer. He is one of the best library designers I've ever had the privilege to work with. But the rat has deserted and works on core.
And if you were to leave core, I think we should pack up and just.
Core
for another language.
Course, everybody else, of course, gonna quit because they'll have to do so much work that Jens is doing that. Doug Gregor, who, I mean, he was a moderator of Boost. He was key on Boost for years, but because of his job, working on Clang, he's deserted just for core. And a lot of folks too, like Dave, they're very important in the general committee process in extensions and core and whatnot, so they split their time. Okay, we already talked about that. Is existing practice really needed? We always say existing practice is needed. That's yes. It depends on what's involved in the library. If it's a single function library to add some math function, let's say, to the math header, they're just there's no issue over specification or anything because it's every mathematics textbook essentially, or there's some proposals that the library working group can look at the standardese and is very comfortable that it is useful, implementable, blah, 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 all the things why they normally want. So that's one extreme. It's extremely rare. Okay. But then the next step up the ladder is you'll hear somebody say, hey, has this been implemented? And if the answer is yes, people they don't ask to see the implementation. Then if it's a little more complex, if the answer is yes, it's been, is that reference, or they'll say, is there a reference implementation that's available? And on and on. And then you get into the heavyweight libraries, something like networking, file system, or any of the big regex, or any of the bigger stuff, medium and bigger, and even small, even the larger small ones. People say, geez, this is too complicated to know how useful it is, to know whether it's implementable, to know what users think of it, to know if it really solves the problem. It's supposed to, the only way you can have it is it's out there. It's been implemented, distributed, widely used by a large variety of C++ programmers. And those are the ones where Boost stuff comes in strong, and we've got a lot of libraries that fit into that category, because you can't ask for more exposure than other than something, it reaches even if like Microsoft ships something with their compiler, that's not touching it. As big as Microsoft is, as good as that compiler is, there are still lots of people that are in a different world of operating systems or in scientific problem domains or whatever that aren't seeing it. So one size doesn't fit all, and that's true of a lot of other things. I won't go into that. We've talked about Steam really easy. What shouldn't go into the initial, that front matter about a proposal, these are people like us that read these things. This is not the marketing department that you're trying to impress. All those big words that, what awesome, it does not do your proposal any good to say this is an awesome library that will what do certain people say when they get up and present? They always claim it's going to change the world. It's a telephone and it's going to change the world. Come on. No, this is a technical audience. Don't get off.
It did though.
Well, that was a bad example. That was a crappy example. That was a bad example. Okay. What about okay, and now with this mailing list that we talked about, you can get preliminary feedback from committee members. via this mailing list that Herb's working so hard to get all fired up. But you still don't know, it's like, is the committee members are not all clones of one another. There are some violently differing views of the world, and backgrounds too, because there are some people that their background isn't as a working programmer, they may be an academic, they may be a writer of textbooks or something like that, and their views are, their perspectives are different, and that's valuable. But, anyway, but if you just get feedback from a mailing list, you're never sure, does that represent everybody or just one person who's got fast fingers? So what happens, you go to a committee meeting, you stand up, you present your proposal. You're not given a lot of time. Networking, they might spend several hours on, but I mean, for the size of that proposal, that's a tiny amount of time, really. For most of this stuff, you get about 15 to 20 minutes to stand up there and make a pitch. So you really want somebody at the committee meeting who they can stand up and the best way to do it for most people is simply to show up at a committee meeting yourself. There's usually one a year is usually in North America and one a year is elsewhere, most commonly Europe. The thing about you presenting yourself is it means a knowledgeable person is giving the presentation. And one of the things that staggers me about the committee, about the library working group and the committee as a whole, is how people can see a proposal for something they never seen before, know almost nothing about, and can ask questions and can absorb with an instance critical points that they need to ask questions and grill you about. So it can be a pretty humbling experience. The feedback bandwidth is a lot higher when you're there in person. You get private feedback. People will pull you aside and, say, don't do this, it's a no-no, sort of for cultural reasons or something, or let you know. Just the private feedback's interesting. Is useful. The meetings are endlessly interesting. If you're interested in what's going on here at BoostCon, then you'll find the meeting interesting.
The one important thing to understand about meetings that no one tells you till you arrive is the majority of the work occurs in the bar after the meeting. Meetings are the issues,
I wouldn't say the majority, but I would say important work.
it's when a lot of the progress happens.
But a lot of the progress is made in small groups, certainly, it's a process, and but if you can't come yourself, and lots of people can't, and do you have your hand up, or you just?
Yeah, I have my hand.
Okay, yeah.
That is, one thing also is, and I'll talk now for the evolution, since I don't usually attend library meetings, but we're much more easily just throw a proposal away if the person who is proposing it is not in the room. So if you're proposing to a champion, we feel much less bad about just saying, well, we don't like it, let's move on to the next proposal. But if there's someone in the room, you feel like, well, this guy really paid some travel money here, some hotel money. You feel bad at the human level to just move on. And so you want to give it, you'll be more lenient, or you'll be more saying, well, it's not working, but there's hope if you make these changes. So my experience in evolution for sure is that in-person proposals have a much higher probability of making it through. It's still not an 80% probability, depending. Yeah, maybe 50% of them make it to some point.
Again, I think the difference between evolution and library for a large part of the C++11 cycle was library got the majority of its new features came in around about the TR1 phase, and they were full already. Evolution's always had a full inbox, and hopefully a library's going to have that luxury of a full inbox as we go forward, but for now we have been able to work quite well with the champion model. although it's always better if
Yeah.
the feedback you get from being in the room as opposed to being channeled back through a champion. There's no substitute for the direct feedback of being there and hearing it firsthand.
They're really, and some other things happen too that, and I've seen this happen, that, and it depends on who you are and whatnot, but a lot of the people that come up and they really, they know, the people that appear in person, they know at least the domain of their library. The library, they know a lot about it, they're knowledgeable people, and in some, it's not gonna be for any, because any, you can analyze it just based on the words on paper, but if you're talking about a networking library, the fact that Chris Kohlhoff could stand there, or with some date, time stuff, Jeff Garland, I mean, you see, there's nothing that has to do with time that Jeff can't give authoritative answers for, like was with the networking, Chris is that way, and that increases your faith in the technical work they do. If you ask them questions and got a bunch of BS back, or answers that you really were unhappy with, you felt were not well informed, that's gonna hurt. But I mean, for a lot of people, geez, if you put together a library and got it into Boost and whatnot, or you've been deeply involved with it in Boosting, you're gonna, that helps. It's better to be there in person if you possibly can swing. But those of us who have acted as champions, and I've done it for a number of Boost libraries, you do your best to present it, but then you get questions I can't answer, and if I'm smart, I'll say that. Oh, I can't answer that, we'll have to get back, but where you really get in trouble is you try to answer, you think you know, you try to answer it, and you just bog down, and it's not. How to write standard E's and method of description. I think if you're been involved with Boost documentation, you probably know some of this stuff, but section 17.5 of the standard that's in the library chapter is the method of description, and it's informative, but it's you might want to read that. So that, and 17.6, the library-wide requirements. You're gonna run into a lot of stuff that if you puzzle your way through it, you realize you already know it, you already do it, but those are two clauses in the standard. The shall versus should, must, that kind of standardese, that there are a couple of those, three of those that are answered on that wiki thing that the project editor's working on. We're gonna be able to ask those questions, and that sort of answers will grow, but just ask questions and you'll learn those sort of things. And the other thing is, be sure you start to develop some understanding of the difference between the normative, in other words, the hard specification text, and the information text. And the non-normative stuff like examples and whatnot, that's really important. I mean, it's not in notes, it's really important, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you always want to distinguish it, and distinguish it as non-normative or normative. Those are just a few things to watch out for. That's been covered.
Quick background as to when I wrote Array, I'd never written standards before, so what do? I went for the closest match in the existing library and blatantly published as much wording as I could, so I at least had something in the right form. You often find there's a good model, in my case it was Vector, in the existing standard to at least give you a start as to what your wording would look like.
That's a good point. I've done that in the past. Particularly some of the, like the first, for any given library, there's sort of some front matter, which is the first sentence or two, or maybe it's several paragraphs. I've often felt a little at sea, how do I start off? Well, you look at and you often just start off with these sort of very mechanical statements about, and you see how it's done and whatnot. I think the last thing we want to talk about is, really would like everybody in this room and anybody who, if the video gets edited and when Marshall edits it, doesn't decide the whole thing is so bad that he throws it in the trash can, but if maybe there's some people that read this and watch the video when it goes up on the internet that really do give some consideration to volunteering. We need people to work on specific proposals. I put to review drafts, and that may certainly be something, that's a valuable thing you could do. I hope we're gonna get through this mechanism Herb set up in this mailing list, I hope we're gonna find committee members who are willing to review drafts for you. Not that,
Well, I'm hoping the committee will actually use this list itself to get iterative feedback between meetings, so the draft coming to the meeting.
yeah,
Post, sample drafts,
right.
and get the criticism in the
Oh, you know,
feedback.
I'm almost ready to through with the anything. I should post that up there and ask for a review. Yeah. Bothered me about that, Alistair, but forget it.
Well, I also want to review it, so please put it up.
Here's a couple of other things where we're gonna need some volunteers. And the first one doesn't need a huge number of volunteers, but one or two folks, I love it, is, you know that status page of libraries that are in progress? I'd really like a status page up on the Boost Wiki that lists every library in Boost, including the ones that are already in the standard, and what its status is. If there's a proposal outstanding, what that in number is, and if there's no proposal outstanding, is somebody working, is somebody looking at this? And because I would like to look something, and maybe have a discussion if the answer isn't on the Boost list, if the answer's not obvious, at every library. Because I think, and just think, and is this suitable for the standard? Do we think it's suitable? And if we think it's suitable, if a bunch of people on the list think it's suitable, I think we wanna think about trying to get a proposal in there. The other thing would like to do myself is, then we need champions. If we find people who cannot or do not wish to, for any reason, go to the meeting to present, maybe you might find some other boosters. And I think we want to make it, personally, I believe, it's not policy because it's not been run by anybody else, but personally, I believe that talking about proposals and asking for champions and things like that is on topic for the Boost mailing list. I think that maybe, even if you're not gonna do anything in terms of writing a proposal, think about attending a meeting and volunteering to be a champion at that meeting or help with. When you're standing up there presenting, it's often helpful to have somebody in the audience who's watching reactions and you've got a lot of stuff in your mind when you're standing up and you've got somebody taking notes from the committee that'll go up on a committee meeting. You'll have a committee wiki that you'll have access to, but what's the name of my presentation? But it's helpful to have somebody else who's watching, trying to pick up nuances particularly if there's flack over some aspect of it. The last thing, and then we can have any discussion, but I'm through my presentation, is that I believe Boost has a fair number of nice little things that might be potential additions to the standard that are not libraries. They're thingies. They're in detail. Boost, like, it's in detail. It's the header is lightweight test. Now, I think it'd be wonderful if Boost had, excuse me, if the standard had a true test framework, a heavier one. But I really think that there's a lot of value in an extremely lightweight test. It's just, there's not much in, there's a tiny little header. HARS, it uses macros, HARS, okay, but we'll see. I mean, that's an interesting one for a committee member. The committee members that are always saying macros are hard, you shouldn't use, get rid of macros and whatnot. How do you do that without macros? Language needs more features in it if you're gonna do that without macros, I'm sorry. But I don't
It's
think
awfully ugly without them.
it's awfully ugly without them, and I think macros are quite appropriate in that case, but, that one's an easy, they're little things like that. Maybe they're part of a bigger library that's not, for some reason, going to be proposed, that I really hope that various people might look around, think about that. Is there something that you're pulling out of a detail namespace and using yourself? I think there are probably I bet you there's a dozen of those things anyway, that sort of category. They're not libraries, they've never been peer reviewed.
Some simple examples that went through the C++11 were Next and Pred.
Yeah, they came out of utility, they weren't, they were in, but they were sort of, just little things, yeah. So I think we wanna also be aware of that, of mining essentially Boost for that sort of thing, that don't appear on that front page list of libraries. So anyway, that's the little spiel on trying to recruit interest in the Alistair.
So one last thing on the champion. If papers turn up in our mailing and no champion can be found, as the library working group chair, I will serve as that role, but I prefer not to, because if I'm chairing the meeting, I can't really be championing a paper either. So in the worst case, if you get the paper in front of us, a champion will be found, but it's less effective to go that way.
But even, then you know what really happens? What can really happen then, and this is even worse, okay, Alistair says he's gonna champion. But you deal, the papers are staged throughout the week, and you're dealing with it, say you deal with it at the end of the week. By that time, Alistair's overloaded and exhausted. And people start volunteering, or he asks for help, and this is true of any library working group chair, it's not Alistair personally. So somebody says, well, I'll do it to help you, and so that person has only 5 minutes to read, and didn't bother to read the paper, and just reads it, and then stands up and tries to present it. Geez. Every paper gets handled. We don't, even if the paper is gibberish, we don't drop it on the floor, okay? But not only, it's way better if it's not gibberish, but it is better if there's a knowledgeable person who's prepared to present. Maybe, they don't have to have slides, but usually if it's anything serious, have slides. Anything else? Anybody else? Am I getting any interest? Is anybody getting any interest at all here?
Does anyone have any particular Boost libraries they're thinking of writing up?
Writing up or helping with?
Either or.
Either or. I have vested interest in a couple, the network being one of them. I don't really know what state that's in right now, or how much help it needs, or how much longer.
What you want to do, and I know exactly what the process is because I saw it played out in front of me, is that all you need to do to get started is you want to join the networking study group. And to do that, you simply ask Herb Sutter or Andy, you ask Herb Sutter, send him an email, and ask.
Wasn't he saying Andy this morning?
Well, the deal with Andy is who the answer Herb gave, when Herb walked up as somebody asked me this morning, and I said, oh, here's Herb, ask him. I email Herb and ask, I think is the answer, but here's Herb, ask him, and he says, Well, normally it's email me, but here's what you do. Email Andy Koenig, and I happen to know his email address, it's ARK, it's at DCM.org, and tell him I said it was okay. Then you're on a mailing list, you get notifications of meetings, you can see the discussions. And
The other useful person to mail for networking is Kyle Clapper, who's the work group, subgroup chair.
That's,
study group chair.
that's a good point too. I would, yeah, email him and.
I don't have his email off the top of my head, but I know he's also the committee, not so, he's the person who's
He's the
maintaining.
He's the secretary.
So,
No, wait.
Secretary.
He's the secretary of the,
he takes the minutes during the meeting, so if you look at our meeting minutes,
yeah.
you'll find his email on
Clark
there.
isn't secretary, Clark's vice chair, who is. Needless to say, we're really worried about formality, we can't remember what people's titles are. There is, and I mentioned a URL, there's I don't think I talked about this thing on the web page, on the Boost website. In the URL will be in the
Committee page.
slides that go up, that talks about what it's like to go to a committee meeting, just so you're prepped for what's actually going to happen. Particularly, the first hour, or sometimes it runs on to 2 hours, is god-awful administrivia, and I'm always afeared that somebody will say, oh my God, this is what they do in a meeting, and turn around and walk out. And then you break into working groups, and then that's where it gets interesting. The first, people snoozing, reading newspapers, arguing about useless things.
Are we allowed to have, vote the minutes in yet from the previous meeting?
Yeah, vote the minutes in, announce who the host is.
But again, we also set out the agenda for that week's work.
Yeah,
Have
yeah.
a fair, so it's a good summary of what's going to come up as well.
It's not something that should be done away with, it has to be, but my theory was that when people get long-winded, that we should all have these little flags, that we can start waving a certain color flag when I'm bored, whoever's talking, please move your, please bring this to some kind of conclusion, and then they could sit there as they're talking. And first one will go up, and then 2 or 3 will go up, and then as the whole room turns to a yellow flag, they'll get the idea that, but.
And anyone have any other ideas about libraries they might be interested in working with or writing out?
Get ready. I see somebody, come on.
I will go look. I will. I'm already, in some measure, supposed to be working with Beaman, but I haven't seen any activity yet.
I'd like, and yes.
I mean, 3 specific libraries I have in mind I would love to see come out of Boost, that Joel de Guzman pointed out, kind of like, the fundamental data abstractions were missing. Any is one, optional is another, and variant is the third.
Optional is one that we use, that we'd like to get out of Boost, because we're not allowed to use Boost, but we use it until, and then when we have to convert, we go, oh, geez, how are we gonna get rid of that?
So you just said you were gonna write a proposal for it, is that?
Who
I would like to
did
try.
optional?
Writing's my worst thing.
Optional has been written at once before. We were looking at it for TR2.
Okay.
It was a little controversial because of the way optional handles references.
Oh, yeah.
So, or in
little?
particular rebinds
A
references.
little.
So that was,
There are recurring discussions on the developers list about that.
and the question of whether the pointer syntax was the right syntax. But certainly the semantic of something like optional, there was a lot of interest in.
Yeah.
But maybe you could get it in without the reference stuff, because we don't use the reference stuff anyway.
Well, that's the
You know.
question. How strongly? I know the author of the paper felt very strongly about the reference stuff at the time as well. So don't give up if that's what you want in
Yeah,
there.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
that I remember was the controversial part of the proposal.
Yeah, so you could do a revision and omit that, huh?
It's very important when you stand up and, when you, with a proposal that, you don't knee-jerk react against people wanting to change your baby. A lot of the reactions and requests for change are good, and so think very carefully. I've made a couple of mistakes where I reacted too quickly. What I should have said is I need to think about that.
And that goes both ways, because you might
Yeah, you
happily give in, just like, let's take my proposal, if I make this quick change, great. If it's something that actually you thought was very fundamental and important, don't forget to stand your ground as well.
Yeah.
That it's a fun balance to find.
And, yeah,
Well, that's something, you know, I was just thinking, you know, I don't use optional to a reference, but someone put it in for a reason. I don't know you don't use that for anything, but I would hate to think that because we excluded something, we broke the design in some way. And since I didn't write it, I don't really know.
well, the boost list is one good place to ask that question. Try to contact the original developer. Who was the original developer?
It's a long time since I looked at the
Yeah, I
boost
know.
version.
I wouldn't even ask the question, I would search the list because it's been discussed many times.
Okay, right, it's been beaten to death already, so the pros and cons, research that. Yeah, I mean, remember, the C++ committee, it's an open source software project in effect. It's an all volunteer, nobody writes a proposal. The answer for why a lot of stuff is not in the standard is no one wrote a proposal. And it's as simple as that. If there's no proposal, then we're not doing it. We're not standardizing.
And another thing you might find interesting if you start looking at writing up a boost proposal is I believe the majority of boost is still mostly a C++ 03 library. You're beginning to get the
Well, different libraries are adopting at different rates. That's one of the things, I'm making one last pass all this summer. I'm making one last pass through file system, adding 11 features and testing them so I can be sure I got them right.
So, but certainly for proposals coming forward now, we'd be expecting to evaluate them in the context of a C++ 11 library using C++ 11 features.
Right.
So you might have, if you've not done much with C++ 11 before, this is a good exercise just to maybe gain experience in some of these more interesting features that you get to play with in your own little sandbox
Well,
almost as your...
I feel perfectly comfortable as a library working group member if somebody comes forward and says, here's a library that I want to propose. It's currently just C++ 03. Here are the changes I'm planning to make it C++ 11. What I would do then, if I was saying, is, do you have any suggestions for other changes? That's not going to cause your proposal, the fact that it is not, that the initial proposal is not C++ 11 is not going to stop it.
Don't let it hold you back, but it might be part of the fun of the learning exercise of taking something that you know is already well designed, and it's a chance to gain exposure and experience with some of the C++ 11 features that...
Terry?
Yeah, if is there a way you could get like a Boost 2.0 started or something where it starts off assuming, at work again, we have to take all the Boost stuff out before we can ship anything. So we often refer to any software library as Boosty if it's kind of incestually linked to itself, so that, you know, it's got so much boost. It's got boost enable if instead of standard enable if. It's got boost if instead of standard conditional. You know, so maybe at some point, I don't know how this happens because Boost is still trying to maintain backwards compatibility, but maybe there's a way to say Boost 2.0 that doesn't do that, where we can start with fresh libraries that don't promise to be backward compatible.
That's sort of that's a different question from the topics here, but yeah.
Well, I mean, to get it
it's an
into
issue.
existing practice is what I'm thinking, you
Yeah.
know. To get it out there where people will use it now that C++ OX is, or 1.11 is real, you know, to have a sandbox for just those kinds of projects where the other Boost stuff, you know, Boost is built upon Boost in a lot of cases, where there could be a new Boost that's built on just C++ 11, which doesn't have all that baggage.
Right, that is, yeah.
Move semantics comes to mind too. There's the emulation mode, there's all the macros that go with trying to support the
I
old
know
way.
for file system that supporting, this is the biggest library I support. The way I kind of feel is, from Microsoft, I want to support the last 3 shipping compilers. So I don't count 11 yet, because that's not shipping yet. So I want to, 8, 9, and 10, I want to support. My interest at that point drops off really, really rapidly. So, and the same with GCC, you know, the major compilers, you want to you do want to support past versions, and that means 03 at the moment, but, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Microsoft has announced publicly that they intend to, after 11 ships, that there will be an out-of-band update so that they can get more 11 features into their compiler without us having to wait for the next full
Dev Studio,
Visual Studio release. You know, it's out of sync, I think was the phrase they used, and that was publicly announced, nothing secret like that. So, you know, we're gonna be in a state relatively soon where and we've got Intel rolling out features in their compiler, and C++11 is happening faster than C++98 happened. So, yeah, Terry, I think we're still a little bit premature, but, yeah, I don't know, I mean, it's support of, once in every major platform, the most popular compiler for that platform is supporting 11, you just start to wonder how much effort you want to put in on supporting 03 stuff. It's a good question.
Well, the other question becomes the Boost plumbing. Do you use Boost Shared Pointer internally or standard Shared Pointer
Mhm.
internally?
Well, and there's some mechanisms to, yeah.
But
No, there's a
different
lot,
topic,
it's a
different
different topic, it's after 6 o'clock. Thanks, we didn't get a large crowd here, but hey, this is outreach work. We're happy with anybody, and if we can attract anybody to,
We forgot to put in the tweaks to make the video go viral.
you know, I probably said something. I hope they edit, do they edit these tapes they put up there? I don't know.
You're afraid of leaving something for Eric to blog, is that it?
Yeah. Well, that thing with Eric Ward was something I said, it was just unexpected, I wasn't expecting to get quoted. Thanks for coming.